Some people don't ignore you because you're invisible. They ignore you because they think you don't matter. The coffee had already gone cold. Not untouched, just forgotten. A thin layer of cream settled at the top, unmoving, like time had paused around it. Emily Carter stood a few feet away, her tray balanced lightly in one hand, her eyes lingering on the cup for just a second too long. Then she moved. Smooth. Quiet. Like she always did. The lunch rush had begun to swell. The low hum of conversations filling the restaurant, silverware clinking, chairs shifting, the familiar rhythm of people who had places to be and deals to close. And then he walked in. Daniel Brooks didn't enter a room. He changed it. Conversations softened. Heads turned, even if just for a moment. Not out of curiosity, out of recognition. Power had a presence, and his was unmistakable. Tailored navy suit. Polished shoes. A watch that probably cost more than a year's rent. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. The hostess greeted him with a careful smile, already leading him to the best table without asking. He didn't look at her. He didn't look at anyone, especially not Emily. Black coffee, he said as he sat, placing his phone on the table without glancing up. No greeting. No eye contact. Just expectation. Emily stepped forward, her posture straight, her expression neutral. Of course, sir. Her voice was calm. Even. He didn't respond. His attention was already somewhere else. Emails, numbers, decisions that moved millions of dollars without hesitation. To him, she was part of the background. Like the table. Like the chair. Something that existed to serve a function and nothing more. She placed the coffee in front of him with precise care. Not a drop spilled. Not a sound made. For a brief second, her hand hovered near the cup. Then it withdrew. Daniel reached for the cup without looking, took a sip, and frowned slightly. Not because of the taste, but because something on his screen demanded more of his attention. The coffee was set down again. Forgotten. Around him, the meeting began. Two men in suits joined him, their voices low but urgent, words like acquisition, risk exposure, and final approval slipping through the air like quiet warnings. Emily moved between tables, refilling glasses, clearing plates, her presence barely noticed. But she heard. Not everything. Just enough. A number mentioned too casually. A timeline that didn't align. A hesitation in one man's voice that didn't match his confidence. She passed their table again, slower this time. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough to listen. Daniel leaned back slightly, his fingers tapping once against the table. We move forward today, he said. No delays. The other man hesitated. Just for a fraction of a second. Emily saw it. No one else did. She stepped away, her grip tightening slightly around the edge of her tray. She could say something. She could interrupt. She could risk it. But she didn't. Instead, she walked back toward the counter, her expression unchanged, her steps steady. The coffee on Daniel's table remained untouched now, cooling further, forgotten again. Emily glanced at it once more, then at the documents spread across his table. And then she made a decision. Not with words, not with urgency, but with timing. Because sometimes the smallest action, done at the exact right moment, changes everything. Emily did not hurry. She never did. The tray in her hand felt lighter now, though nothing had changed. Plates still needed clearing. Orders still needed writing. The world around her kept moving at the same steady pace. But her attention had shifted. Back at the table, Daniel's voice remained controlled, confident, certain. The numbers check out, he said, glancing briefly at the document in front of him before returning to his phone. We finalized today. One of the men across from him adjusted his tie. A small movement. Easy to miss. There is just one detail, he began, his tone careful, almost rehearsed. Daniel did not look up. Then it is not a detail. It is a delay, he replied flatly. Silence followed. Not long. Just enough to feel. Emily stepped behind the counter, placing her tray down with a soft, deliberate motion. Her eyes flicked once toward the reflection in the glass display. From there, she could see them. Not directly, but clearly enough. She reached for a clean cup, poured fresh coffee. Steam rose gently, curling into the air before disappearing. Her movements remained precise, measured, intentional. She picked up the cup and walked back toward the table. This time, she did not wait to be called. She placed the new coffee beside the old one without a word. Daniel glanced at it briefly, irritation flashing across his face. I did not ask for another, he said, his voice sharper now. Emily met his gaze for the first time. Not challenging, not apologetic, just steady. The other one has been sitting for a while, sir. A pause. Something subtle shifted. Daniel looked at her. Really looked this time. Only for a second. Then he dismissed it. Fine. She nodded once and turned to leave. But as she stepped away, she adjusted something on the table. Barely noticeable. A slight repositioning of the document near his hand. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just a small shift. Enough to reveal a line that had been partially covered before. Emily continued walking. Did not look back. The conversation resumed behind her. Faster now. Less controlled. Wait. One of the men said suddenly. Papers rustled. Chairs moved slightly against the floor. Daniel's voice followed, lower this time. What is it? No question mark. Just pressure. A longer silence now. The kind that stretches. The kind that changes things. This clause, the man said slowly. The timeline is not 30 days. It is 3. Daniel's chair shifted. He leaned forward. For the first time since he arrived, his phone remained untouched. That is not possible, he said. But his tone had changed. The certainty was gone, replaced by something sharper. Focus. He pulled the document closer. Read it again. Then again. The room around him seemed quieter now, though nothing had actually changed. Conversations still filled the air. Glasses still clinked. But at that table, everything had narrowed. Who reviewed this? Daniel asked, his voice controlled but tighter than before. No one answered immediately. Across the room, Emily picked up another tray. Her hands were steady, her expression unchanged. But her eyes moved once. Briefly, toward the table, then away, because she already knew what they were just beginning to see. And sometimes, the difference between a mistake and a disaster is not who speaks first. It is who notices in silence. The air at the table had changed. Not louder, not dramatic, just tighter, like something invisible had shifted into place and no one could ignore it anymore. Daniel did not speak immediately. His eyes stayed on the document, scanning each line with a precision that had built his entire career. Once, twice, a third time, his jaw tightened slightly. 3 days, he said quietly. Not to them, to himself. Across from him, the man who had hesitated earlier now leaned forward, his confidence gone. It must have been a drafting error, he offered, too quickly. Daniel looked up. This time, his gaze did not slide past people. It landed, direct, focused. We do not move millions of dollars on drafting errors, he said. His voice was calm. That made it worse. Silence followed again. Longer now. Around them, the restaurant continued its rhythm. Orders called. Glasses filled. A birthday laugh rose from the far side of the room. But at this table, time slowed. Daniel reached for the fresh cup of coffee. The steam had faded, but it was still warm. He took a sip. This time, he noticed the taste. Bitter. Strong. Clear. He set the cup down carefully and looked back at the document. The line was obvious now. Impossible to miss once seen. But it had been hidden before. Not by intention, just by placement. By angle. By assumption. His fingers tapped once against the table, then stopped. If we had signed this, he said slowly, we would have been locked into a 3-day execution window. No one interrupted. Which means, he continued, his eyes lifting again, we would have failed before we even began. The words settled heavily, though his tone never rose. Across the room, Emily stood near the service station, folding a napkin with careful precision. Her hands moved automatically, muscle memory guiding each motion. But her mind was not there. Not fully. She did not need to hear every word. She already knew the outcome. What she did not know was what would happen next. Daniel leaned back slightly in his chair, his gaze drifting for just a moment. Not at his colleagues. Not at the document. But across the room. Toward her. It was not obvious. Anyone watching might have missed it. But for the first time since he walked in, he was not looking through her. He was looking at her. Really looking. Emily did not react. She finished folding the napkin, placed it neatly on the stack, then reached for another. Calm. Controlled. Unmoved. Daniel's attention returned to the table. But something had shifted. Not in the room. In him. We pause everything, he said finally. No signatures. No approvals. Not until every line is verified. The others nodded quickly, relief and tension mixing in their expressions. The crisis had not happened, but it had come close enough to feel real. Close enough to leave a mark. Daniel gathered the documents into a single stack, aligning the edges with exact care. His movements were slower now, more deliberate, as if something invisible had forced him to reconsider the speed he trusted. Then, almost as an afterthought, he spoke again. Who brought the second coffee? The question was simple, but it did not sound casual. One of the men blinked. I did not notice, he said. Daniel's gaze shifted again. This time, there was no hesitation. He looked directly across the room. Emily was already walking toward another table, her steps steady, her posture unchanged. For a moment, Daniel said nothing. He just watched, because somewhere between the first cup and the second, something he had ignored had quietly changed everything. Daniel did not return to his phone. It stayed on the table, screen dimming slowly, as if even it understood it no longer held his full attention. His fingers rested near it, but did not move. Instead, his gaze shifted again, briefly, toward the far side of the room. Emily was clearing a table now, stacking plates with quiet efficiency, her movements as precise as they had been all afternoon. Nothing about her had changed. That was what unsettled him. We should have caught that, one of the men said, breaking the silence at the table, his voice lower now, stripped of earlier confidence. Daniel did not respond immediately. He was still thinking, not about the mistake, not entirely, but about the moment before it was caught. The second cup, the slight shift of paper, the timing, none of it felt accidental. Yes, Daniel said finally. We should have. He gathered the documents again, slower this time, aligning them with care that bordered on deliberate restraint. Then he stood. The movement was subtle, but it carried weight. His colleagues followed instinctively, rising a second later, unsure if the meeting was over or simply paused. Give me a minute, Daniel said. Not a request, not a command, something in between. He stepped away from the table, leaving the papers behind. For the first time that afternoon, he walked without a destination defined by business. He moved through the restaurant with the same composed posture, but something in his pace had changed. Slightly slower, slightly more aware. Emily did not notice him at first, or at least, she did not show it. She was refilling a water glass, her focus on the table in front of her, her expression calm. Daniel stopped a few feet away, close enough to speak, close enough to see details he had ignored before. The steadiness of her hands, the way she listened more than she spoke, the absence of urgency in someone surrounded by it. Excuse me, he said. The words felt unfamiliar in his mouth, not because he had never said them, but because he rarely needed to mean them. Emily turned. Her eyes met his. The same steady gaze. No surprise. No hesitation. Just presence. Yes, sir, she replied. Her voice was even. Professional. Unaffected. Daniel paused. For a fraction of a second, he seemed to search for something. The right question. The right tone. Something that fit this moment better than the ones he was used to. The coffee, he said, nodding slightly toward his table. You replaced it. It was not really a question. Emily held his gaze. Yes. Simple. Direct. Daniel exhaled quietly. And the document, he added, his eyes narrowing just slightly, not in suspicion, but in focus. You moved it. This time, there was a pause. Not long. Just enough to exist. Emily did not look away. I adjusted it, she said. No defense. No explanation. Just truth. The space between them settled into silence again. But it was not the same silence as before. This one held recognition. Daniel studied her for a moment longer. Then, almost imperceptibly, something shifted in his expression. Not dramatic. Not obvious. But real. You saw something, he said. Not accusing. Not impressed. Just acknowledging. Emily's hands rested lightly against the edge of the table. Still steady. I noticed something, she replied. The distinction mattered. Daniel nodded once. Slowly, as if understanding that difference carried more weight than it sounded. Behind him, the restaurant continued its quiet rhythm. But here, in this small space between two people who had barely existed to each other an hour ago, something else had begun. Not loud, not immediate, but undeniable. Because for the first time that day, he was not speaking to a waitress. He was speaking to someone he could not ignore. Daniel did not rush to speak again. That was new. In every room he had ever walked into, words had always come easily, decisions even faster. But here, standing across from Emily, something held him back. Not uncertainty, not hesitation, something closer to awareness. He studied her for another second, as if trying to place her in a framework that made sense to him. But she did not fit. Not into the categories he was used to. Not into the assumptions he relied on. You noticed something? He repeated quietly. Emily gave a small nod. Nothing more. Around them, a server passed by carrying a tray of plates, the faint clatter of silverware briefly filling the space between them. The moment could have broken, but it did not. Daniel glanced back toward his table, where the documents still sat, untouched now, waiting. Then he looked at her again. Most people would have said something, he said. It was not criticism. It was observation. Emily's expression remained calm. Most people would not have been heard, she replied. The words were simple, but they landed. Daniel's jaw shifted slightly, not in disagreement, but in recognition. He could not argue with that. Not honestly. He had spent years building systems where only certain voices mattered. Where attention followed status. Where silence was often mistaken for absence. And you thought moving a piece of paper would be enough? He said, his tone quieter now, more measured. Emily's gaze did not waver. I thought it would be seen, she said. Another pause. Longer this time. Daniel let out a slow breath. Something about that answer stayed with him. Not just the words. The certainty behind them. She had not needed to interrupt. She had not needed to prove anything. She had simply trusted that the right moment, handled correctly, would reveal what needed to be revealed. Daniel looked down briefly, then back up. For the first time, there was something different in his expression. Not authority. Not control. Something more human. It did, he said. The admission was quiet, but it carried weight. Emily nodded once, as if that was all that needed to be said. No satisfaction. No pride. Just acknowledgement. Daniel hesitated again, then added, You may have saved us from a very expensive mistake. Emily's hands rested lightly at her sides. Still steady. You would have found it, she said. Daniel almost smiled. Not because he believed it, but because he understood what she was doing. She was not taking credit. She was not stepping forward. She was simply standing where she was, letting the moment exist without claiming it. Maybe, he said. Then, after a brief pause, but not in time. The honesty in his voice was unmistakable now. Emily held his gaze for a second longer, then gave a small nod. Timing matters, she said. Daniel let that settle. Timing. It was something he had always controlled. Scheduled. Optimized. But this was different. This was not about speed. It was about awareness. About seeing what others missed before it became too late. Behind him, one of his colleagues shifted at the table, glancing over, unsure whether to interrupt. Daniel did not turn. Not yet. He remained where he was, in this unexpected pause, in a conversation that had no agenda, no negotiation, no outcome to control. Just truth. Simple. Unfiltered. Emily, he said, reading her name from the small tag pinned neatly to her uniform. Saying it for the first time, not as a label, but as a name. She responded without hesitation. Yes. Daniel gave a slight nod. Not a command. Not a dismissal. Something closer to respect. Then he stepped back, creating just a little space between them. Not to end the moment, but to acknowledge it had changed. Because somewhere between a forgotten cup of coffee and a single adjusted page, he had stopped seeing her as part of the background, and started seeing her as someone who understood the room better than he did. Daniel did not speak again as he returned to the table, but the way he sat down had changed. Slower, more deliberate, as if the chair no longer belonged to someone who assumed control without question, but to someone who had just realized control could slip in the smallest details. The documents were still there, aligned exactly as he had left them, but they did not look the same anymore. He picked them up again, flipping through each page with careful attention, no longer scanning, but reading. Really reading. Across from him, the others waited. No one rushed him. No one interrupted. They had seen it too. Not just the mistake, but the moment that caught it. We review everything again, Daniel said finally, his voice steady but different now. Line by line. One of the men nodded quickly. Of course. Another leaned forward slightly. We can have legal recheck the entire draft within the hour. Daniel shook his head once. We do it now. His tone was calm, but it left no room for debate. He placed the document flat on the table and pointed to a section near the middle. Start here. They moved closer, attention narrowing, focus sharpening. This was familiar territory again, but something underneath it had shifted. The confidence was still there. The precision. The control. But now there was something else layered beneath it. Awareness. Daniel's eyes moved across the page, slower than before. He paused at each clause, each number, each timeline. Not trusting assumption. Not trusting speed. Checking. Verifying. Understanding. A few minutes passed. Then 10. The rhythm of the restaurant continued around them, unnoticed now. Plates came and went. Conversations rose and fell. But at that table, everything had condensed into the quiet sound of pages turning and pens marking small corrections. Finally, Daniel leaned back slightly. Not in relaxation. In completion. There, he said, tapping a second clause. This one also needs adjustment. The man beside him frowned, reading quickly. Then his expression shifted. You are right. Daniel did not respond. He already knew. Not from instinct alone, but from the discipline of looking again. Of not assuming the first glance was enough. He set the pen down and reached for the coffee. It was still warm. Not hot, but not forgotten either. He took another sip. This time, he did not rush to put it down. Across the room, Emily continued her work. Another table. Another order. Another quiet movement that blended into the rhythm of the place. No one watching closely would think anything had changed. But Daniel noticed now. Not every movement. Not every detail. But enough. Enough to know she was not just moving through the room. She was reading it. The same way he read numbers. The same way he read contracts. Patterns. Signals. Small things that others overlooked. He set the cup down gently and looked back at the document one last time. Clean now. Clear. No hidden mistakes. No overlooked clauses. We proceed, he said. But the words did not carry the same sharp finality as before. They carried something steadier. More grounded. The others nodded, relief visible now. The deal was back on track. The risk contained. The mistake avoided. But Daniel did not immediately gather his things. He sat there for a moment longer than necessary, his gaze drifting again, almost unconsciously, toward the service area. Emily was there, writing something on her notepad, her posture relaxed, her focus complete. She did not look up. She did not need to, because she had already done what mattered. And she had done it without asking to be seen. Daniel exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly. In every boardroom he had ever led, value had been measured in numbers, in results, in visible impact. But here, in the middle of a busy restaurant, something had just challenged that equation. Because the most important action that afternoon had not come from the loudest voice at the table. It had come from the quietest one in the room. The meeting ended without celebration. No handshakes, no smiles, no sense of victory. Just quiet agreement. Papers were gathered. Phones were picked up. Chairs slid back into place. To anyone watching, it looked like another business lunch wrapping up on schedule. Efficient. Controlled. Predictable. But Daniel did not stand immediately. His colleagues did. One by one. They excused themselves, already returning to calls, to emails, to the endless current of decisions waiting outside those walls. We will follow up this afternoon, one of them said. Daniel nodded without looking up. Yes. The word was automatic. Familiar. But his attention was elsewhere. The table in front of him was clear now. The documents gone. The decision made. The mistake avoided. Everything resolved. And yet, he remained seated. His fingers rested lightly against the edge of the table, tapping once. Then stopping. He looked at the empty cup in front of him. The second one. Not the first. The first had been forgotten. This one had not. He picked it up, turning it slightly, as if expecting to find something written there. But there was nothing. Just ceramic. Just weight. Just a reminder. He set it down again, slower this time. Then he stood, not with the urgency of someone late for the next meeting, but with the quiet intention of someone who had decided something else mattered first. Across the room, Emily was placing a check on a table near the window. The afternoon light had shifted, casting a softer glow across the restaurant, turning sharp edges into something warmer, less defined. She thanked the guests with a small nod, her voice steady, then turned toward the service station. Daniel moved toward her. Not quickly, not slowly, just directly. When he reached her, he stopped. Not too close, not distant. Enough space to speak. Enough space to listen. Emily. He said her name again. This time, it did not feel like an observation. It felt like recognition. She looked up, calm, present, the same as before. Yes. Daniel paused, not because he did not know what to say, but because he was choosing how to say it. was new too. I owe you something, he said. The words were simple, but they did not sound like a transaction. Emily tilted her head slightly, not confused, just considering. You do not, she replied. Daniel shook his head once. I do. A brief silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just honest. You saw something that we missed, he continued. And you acted. Emily's expression did not change. I adjusted a page, she said. The same quiet precision. The same refusal to exaggerate. Daniel almost smiled again. This time it showed. Just slightly. And that was enough, he said. Another pause. Then he reached into his jacket, pulling out a card. Clean. Minimal. His name printed in sharp, simple letters. He placed it gently on the counter between them. Not pushed. Not forced. Just placed. If you ever decide that this is not where you want to stay, he said, his tone even, I would like to speak with you. Emily looked at the card, then back at him. No immediate reaction. No surprise. Just consideration. About what? She asked. Daniel met her gaze. About how you see things, he said. The answer was direct. Unpolished. Real. Emily glanced at the card once more, then rested her hand lightly beside it. Not picking it up. Not moving it away. Just acknowledging it existed. I already have a job, she said. Daniel nodded. I can see that. The faintest hint of humor in his voice. But it did not change his meaning. The moment lingered. Then, slowly, Emily picked up the card. Not with excitement. Not with hesitation. Just with the same calm control she had shown all day. She slipped it into the small pocket of her apron. Then looked back at him. Have a good afternoon, she said. Professional. Simple. But not distant. Daniel held her gaze for a second longer. Then gave a small nod. Not as a CEO. Not as someone used to being followed. But as someone who had just learned something he could not ignore. Then he turned and walked away. And this time, he noticed everything he had missed when he first walked in. The door closed behind Daniel with a soft, controlled click. Outside, the city moved the way it always did. Cars passed. Signals changed. People walked with purpose, unaware that anything inside that restaurant had shifted at all. But Daniel paused on the sidewalk. Just for a second. Not because he had nowhere to go. His car was already waiting at the curb, engine running, driver watching the street with practiced patience. Everything was in place. Everything was ready. But he did not move immediately. His hand adjusted the cuff of his sleeve, a habit he had repeated thousands of times without thinking. This time he noticed it. The small, automatic gestures. The things done without awareness. Inside, Emily returned to her rhythm. Another table. Another order. Another quiet exchange that looked exactly like the dozens before it. To everyone else, nothing had changed. She still moved the same way. Spoke the same way. Worked the same way. But there was something different now. Not visible. Not obvious. Just a subtle shift in how the room responded to her. The manager glanced at her once, longer than usual. A coworker paused mid-sentence, watching her for a second before continuing. No one said anything. They did not need to. Something had been noticed. Even if they could not explain it. Emily stepped behind the counter and reached for her notepad. The pen moved across the page in clean, precise strokes. Numbers. Orders. Details. Everything in its place. Then, almost without thinking, her hand paused. Just for a moment. She reached into the small pocket of her apron and touched the edge of the card. Still there. Flat. Unchanged. She did not take it out. Not yet. Instead, she let her hand rest there for a second longer, feeling its presence. Not as an opportunity. Not as a promise. Just as something that now existed in her world. Then she let it go. The next customer spoke. She listened. Fully. Completely. Like always. Across the street, Daniel finally moved. He stepped toward the car, the driver already opening the door for him. Office, sir, the driver asked. Daniel paused again, one hand resting lightly on the edge of the door. His gaze lifted, not to the skyline, not to his phone, but back toward the restaurant. The glass windows reflected the afternoon light, making it hard to see inside clearly. But he knew exactly where she would be. Somewhere between tables. Somewhere unnoticed. Except now she was not. Yes, he said finally, taking his seat. The door closed, and the car pulled away smoothly, merging into traffic as if nothing had interrupted its schedule. Inside the vehicle, Daniel reached into his jacket, pulling out his phone. The screen lit up instantly. Notifications. Messages. Decisions waiting for him. He looked at them, then locked the screen again. For once, urgency did not win. Instead, he leaned back slightly, his gaze shifting to the passing city outside. Buildings, people, movement, patterns, all the things he thought he understood, all the things he thought he controlled. And yet, one small moment, one quiet action, had forced him to see something differently. Back inside the restaurant, Emily placed a fresh cup of coffee in front of a new customer. Her movements were the same, precise, calm, unremarkable. She adjusted the cup slightly, aligning it perfectly with the edge of the table, then stepped back. The customer did not notice, did not need to. Emily turned away, already moving to the next task, because she was not waiting to be recognized. She never had been, and maybe that was the difference. She did not raise her voice. She did not demand attention. She simply did what needed to be done, at the right moment, in the right way, and let the result speak for itself. Somewhere between what is seen and what is overlooked, the truth always waits. And sometimes, it only takes one quiet action to make it impossible to ignore. The afternoon light faded slowly, stretching shadows across the restaurant floor as the rush softened into something quieter, something slower. Tables that had been filled an hour ago now sat empty, glasses half full, napkins folded or forgotten. The rhythm changed, not stopped, just eased. Emily moved through it the same way she always had. Calm, precise, present. She wiped down a table near the window, her movements unhurried, her attention complete. Every detail in place, every motion intentional, nothing wasted. The card remained in her apron pocket, unseen, unmentioned, but not forgotten. Across the city, Daniel sat in his office, the skyline stretching wide beyond the glass walls, the late afternoon sun reflecting off buildings in sharp, golden lines. His desk was exactly as he left it. Clean, organized, predictable, files stacked in perfect order, screens waiting for input, decisions lined up in silent expectation. He stood by the window, his jacket resting over the back of his chair, his sleeves rolled just enough to suggest he had been working. But he had not started. Not yet. His mind was still somewhere else. Not on numbers. Not on projections. On a small moment in a place he would normally forget the second he walked out. A cup of coffee. A slight movement of paper. A voice that did not rise. And yet, changed everything. He turned back toward his desk and sat down slowly. His hand reached for a document, then paused. Instead, he opened a blank page on his screen. No template, no format, just space. He stared at it for a second, then began to type. Not instructions, not commands, questions. Short, direct, clear. The kind he had not asked before. Who reviewed this? What did we miss? Where are we assuming instead of seeing? His fingers moved steadily, the rhythm different from his usual pace. Slower, more deliberate, each word placed with intention, not to move faster, but to understand better. Back at the restaurant, Emily stepped outside for a brief break, the cool air brushing lightly against her face. The street was quieter now, less crowded, more space between people. She leaned lightly against the side of the building, her hands resting in her apron pockets. For a moment, she closed her eyes, not in exhaustion, in stillness. Then she reached into her pocket and took out the card. She looked at it, not reading the name, not studying the details, just holding it, feeling the weight of what it represented. Not an escape, not a reward, a possibility. She turned it slightly between her fingers, then slipped it back into her pocket. No decision, not yet. Inside, someone called her name. She opened her eyes and stepped back in without hesitation, returning to the same rhythm, the same quiet presence that had carried her through the day. Across the city, Daniel leaned back. In his chair, his gaze drifting again to the skyline. The questions on his screen remained unanswered. For now, but they existed, and that alone changed something. Because awareness does not begin with answers. It begins with the willingness to ask differently. The room around him was silent, controlled, familiar, but it did not feel the same. Not after today. Not after realizing that the most important voice in the room is not always the one speaking the loudest. And somewhere,